Good morning, everybody. We're going to let everybody spill in from the waiting room, and we're going to get started here in just a minute or two. Thanks for hanging on. All right. Veronica, should we go ahead and kick it off?
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Bergman, and we are coming to you live from the DOLA home office at 1313 Sherman Street in Denver. This is our local government resources call on July 16th, 2025. This bi-monthly call continues to serve our local communities by providing an access point to DOLA and our partner agencies, and by providing timely and relevant updates and resources to support local government operations. DOLA leadership has been spending a lot of time on the road lately, most recently the CCI and CML conferences, learning from you and hearing what challenges your communities are facing. In light of so much change and uncertainty at the federal level and a tight budget year here at the state level, we understand how difficult it is for local governments to budget and plan. The state of Colorado and DOLA are committed to supporting our local government partners as federal policies and legal challenges continue to evolve. As we continue getting requests from local government representatives for more information, this call provides an ongoing opportunity to provide those updates when they are available. We hope you find this month's topic on navigating financial uncertainty timely and useful. Let me go through today's agenda. I'll start by providing some general DOLA updates, and we'll hear from the Colorado Resiliency Office and the Department of Public Health and Environment on their respective programs. We'll then get into some federal funding updates with Tara Caruth from the Governor's Office of Federal Funding and Strategic Initiatives. Next, Shale Sabo from the Colorado Resiliency Office will set the context for this webinar and speak to the resiliency perspective regarding economic uncertainty. Next, the Division of Local Government's own Mia Gonzalez will get into budgeting basics as well as resources for hard fiscal times. And finally, Dana Levac, Regional Manager for the Northwest region, will help you plan around a lean capital budget. You are welcome to put questions in the chat or the Q&A feature as we go along, and any questions that don't get answered by our subject matter experts during the presentation will get addressed at the end. Now, let's get into some general DOLA and partner agency updates. From our State Demography Office, save the date for the 2025 State Demography Summit on Friday, November 7th, 2025 at the Arvada Center. This one-day conference will present summaries on SDO's vintage 2024 population estimates and forecasts, revisions to the website, and updates on SDO's work over the past year. A live stream broadcast option will also be offered. Sponsorship opportunities are available for organizations that wish to support SDO's annual outreach event. Contact Adam Bickford at adam.bickford@state.co.us for more information. The American Community Surveys detail languages spoken at home and ability to speak English for the population 5 years and older, 2017 to 2021 tabulation is now available. This tabulation provides data on over 500 individual languages and language groups spoken across the country in the 2017 to 2021 from the ACS. Preparation for the Census 2030 Local Update of Census Addresses Program. The 2030 Local Update of Census Addresses Program is a Census Bureau program to update and confirm residents' records in advance of the 2030 decennial census. Please review the resources provided by the National Center of State Center of State Legislatures, and the U.S. Census Bureau provided in the chat. More information about the 2025 State Demography Summit and the ACS languages data will be published on the SDO website, and please be sure to sign up for the SDO newsletter. News from our Division of Housing. DOLA's Division of Housing is proud to welcome their new Division Deputy Director, Megan Yonke. Megan will oversee the offices of Housing Finance and Sustainability, Regulatory Oversight, and Housing Recovery. She brings more than 17 years of experience working across federal, state, and local governments with a strong focus on housing. She most recently served as Governor Polis' Senior Housing Policy Advisor and will officially join DOLA on July 22nd, 2025. Megan, welcome aboard. We can't wait to have you. You are invited to submit public comments and attend a public hearing regarding DOLA's 2025 to 2030 Consolidated Plan for U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, that's HUD, funds. Annual action plan will cover the period from April 1, 2025 through March 31st, 2030, and is now published on DOH's Publications and Reporting website. Submit comments on the action plan through July 31st, 2025, and at a public hearing. This hearing will be held on Thursday, August 17th, 2025, from 1:30 to 2 p.m., either in person at 1313 Sherman Street, room 518, or virtually on Google Meet. Applications will open soon for a second child care facility workshop cohort in 2025. This cohort is designed to support project teams and partnerships in the planning stage of a child care facility to understand best practices, successful approaches to development, and engage with a network of peers to ensure the highest level of quality and sustainability possible. Please direct any questions to Aaron McNabb and Matt Long. News from my Division of Local Government. The division is now offering incentive funding for local governments who have opted into Prop 123 to reward early adoption of fast track review policies, setting aside $2 million of funding. Local governments that adopt a Proposition 123 compliant expedited development review process by December 31st, 2025, will receive up to $50,000 in grant funding with no local match required. Local planning capacity grants will be awarded and must be spent on eligible planning activities. Jurisdictions that adopt between January 1 and June 30th, 2026 will be eligible for incentive awards. The awards will be less than $50,000 as funds remain available. Compliance framework and guidelines are required by Governor Polis's May 16th executive order regarding strategic growth are available. The framework and guidelines provide guidance for state agencies responsible for the implementation of 7 laws included in the 2024 and 2025 strategic growth legislation and for the local governments subject to those laws. The material outlines the framework, criteria, and benchmarks that will be used to certify strategic growth compliant local governments for the purpose of establishing priority for state funding opportunities. DOLA continues to make itself available to local governments seeking assistance in complying with the new laws and the executive order, with extensive information on the laws subject to the executive order available on the Land Use and Housing Legislation website. On June 30th, 2025, CDO, that's the Colorado Community Development Office, also published a suite of important resources as part of the 2024 Land Use and Housing Legislation implementation. These resources provide guidance for local communities developing housing action plans, implementing affordability and displacement mitigation strategies, and designating neighborhood centers. The neighborhood centers guidance also includes information on a pilot designation round opportunity for local governments that opened on July 7th, 2025, and runs through October 31st, 2025. Public comment is open through July 31st, 2025 on first draft documents for the statewide strategic growth report. Senate Bill 24-174 required DOLA to create 2 statewide reports, the Strategic Growth Report, which is due October 30th, 2025, and the Natural Land and Agricultural Opportunities Report, which is due December 31st of this year. The Accessory Dwelling Unit Grant Program will provide, grants to accessory dwelling units, supportive jurisdictions for activities that promote the construction of ADUs. First round of funding will be open from August 1st to August 29th, 2025. Another current funding opportunity is the Community Development Block Grant Design, Engineering, and Environmental Clearance Program, It offers financial assistance for eligible applicants to complete their design, engineering, and environmental clearance activities for an eligible CDBG PF project. The maximum grant award for the program is $100,000, and the application is open through September 1st, 2025. Applicants are required to meet with their regional manager prior to submitting an application. There is a CDBG PF DEEC, that's Design, Engineering, and Environmental Clearance, Q&A session on August 5th at 1 p.m. Moving into some engagement opportunities and events. CRF update. DLG's Colorado Resiliency Office is in the planning process to update to the Colorado Resiliency Framework and is offering several engagement opportunities for those interested in informing this plan, starting with the virtual Resilience Summit on July 17th, followed closely by day and evening summits on August 14th. Learn more about the CRF update and how to participate and sign up to receive 2025 CRF update information directly to your inbox. Thank you to all the local governments who have participated in the local government survey on resilience planning. Your input is vital to not only ongoing resilience programming and technical assistance at the state, but also in informing gaps and opportunities to focus on the 2025 framework update. We are happy to share the results of this survey are now available on our website. State Revolving Fund. The Colorado Department of Health and Environment, Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority, and DOLA are hosting the second of two free regional workshops on July 29th in Castle Pines for entities wishing to learn more about the SRF program. The workshops are geared toward local governments and private nonprofits that operate drinking water or wastewater systems. Civic Solutions workshops. Space is still available to participate in two-day hands-on training programs designed to equip local government leaders with the tools and strategies to foster a culture of innovation in their office. The workshops are part of the DOLA Civic Solutions Hub, a brand new program from DLG designed to support local governments in capacity building and operational efficiency. The first workshop will be in Manitou Springs, August 14th to 15th, 2025. The second will be in Montrose on August 20th to 21st. Workshops are open to 2 to 5 members per jurisdiction and limited to 15 jurisdictions per location. Please contact Todd Leopold, DOLA Regional Manager for the Central Region, for more information about this program or the workshops. Now, I'll hand it over to Marguerite Harden of the Colorado Resiliency Office to talk about the upcoming Wildfire Resilience Code peer exchange. Marguerite, take it away.
Thank you, Eric. As many of the attendees of this call know, on July 1st, the 2025 Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code was adopted. This first of its kind code sets minimum requirements for local Colorado jurisdictions to either meet or exceed. So this model code applies not only to new construction, but also significant renovations, but importantly, it does not otherwise impact the existing building stock here in Colorado. Local governments will have about 9 months, so until until April 1st, 2026 to adopt locally. I have just dropped into the chat links to the final version of this code, as well as the state map that identifies wildfire risk across the state. So to support local entities or governing bodies with implementation of this code, we at the DOLA Colorado Resiliency Office are partnering with the Division of Fire Prevention and Control, who is regulating and enforcing this code, to launch a Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code, or CWRC, implementation peer exchange. And we are hosting a meeting today at 2 p.m. to introduce the implementation peer exchange. It's a really dense code and it's a very detailed map. And so this meeting today is really just meant to provide a baseline of information about the code. And it's really going to be just presented by DFPC, Division of Fire Prevention and Control. But going forward and beginning on August 6th at 2 p.m., these meetings will continue on the first Wednesday of each month at 2 p.m. And it will be more of a peer exchange format, which allows local governments to share how they are navigating this code and deciding how to implement it locally. So please feel free to find out more, the link in the chat, and register to attend. Hope to see you there. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Marguerite. Next, we'll go to Megan Guevara, Director of the Office of Environmental Justice in the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Megan.
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm really happy to be here today to talk about a great opportunity that we have for a local community to learn more about how the interaction of pollution and other hazards is impacting local public health. We can go to the next slide. So as you all likely know, the legislature has passed several laws pertaining to environmental justice over the past several years, with the goal of ensuring that everyone in Colorado has access to a clean and healthy environment, as well as the ability for local communities to have a say in environmental decision-making that's going to affect their citizens. Next slide. And in 2024, the legislature passed the Cumulative Impact and Environmental Justice Act, which was HB 24-1338. And that directed CDPHE to conduct 2 environmental equity and cumulative impact analyses in local communities. And this is a comprehensive study of how many factors like pollution and environmental hazards, extreme heat, socioeconomic conditions interact and collectively affect public health. And this will provide a more accurate picture than looking at any individual factor alone. So the goal of the analysis is to make this information available to government agencies at the state and local level to help to inform actions in the community in areas such as permitting, planning, and licensing. Next slide. So we are excited to be looking for the first community to participate in this ESHA process. At this point, we're selecting one community who would like to be part of this first analysis. And the first step to be considered is a brief nomination form that can be submitted by community members or by local leaders. If you would like to nominate your community, the form is open until August 8th, and we'll make sure that we follow up with all these links for you. And we'll then be selecting 10 finalist communities to submit more detailed applications. Those finalists will be selected based on community interest, level of environmental exposures in the community, and also the presence of vulnerable populations like people with asthma and children under 5. And we're planning to announce the location selection in mid-October, and then we will also be opening the request for the contractor who will actually conduct the analysis at the same time, with the goal of early 2026 of beginning the analysis process. Next slide, please. And to be eligible for consideration, we need to receive a nomination from the community, and communities can submit as many nominations as they would like. There needs to be an interested local coordinating agency, which is a local government agency or a community-based organization that's willing to serve a coordinating role in the process. And the community must be primarily disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards according to state law. If you're unsure if your community is disproportionately impacted, we'll also share a link to the map with this information. And the community that can be nominated could be as small as a neighborhood or as large as a multi-county area or anything in between. And if you're interested in serving as the local coordinating agency, you can indicate that interest on the nomination form. And the local coordinating agency and the selected community will be eligible to receive funding from CDPHE to support that role. Next slide, please. And if you'd like to learn more, we are hosting a webinar tomorrow. And you can also visit our website for more details on the analysis itself and what's included, the role of the local coordinating agency, and how to determine if your community is disproportionately impacted. And you can also feel free to reach out to our team with any questions if you would like to learn more. And we hope that you will consider nominating your community. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much, Megan. We'll now turn it over to Tara Caruth from the governor's office to provide the latest from the federal level. Tara.
Thank you, Eric. You can go to the next slide. We're going to provide just a few brief updates on litigation, federal budget updates, as well as some funding opportunities. So you can please go to the next slide. For litigation updates, wanted to share where we are with the state challenging different aspects of funding and terms and conditions. We've I mentioned the last time we met, terms and conditions. There have been some challenging terms and conditions posed with both Department of Transportation, where now a preliminary injunction has been granted, as well as Department of Homeland Security, where they walked back some of the application of some of the terms and conditions. We're encouraging local governments and all of our partners to please review any federal grants and the terms and conditions with your legal counsel, legal advisors, just to make sure you're not committing to something that you can't or are unwilling to engage in. Also challenging Department of Education, the withholding of over 70 million in formula funds to local school districts. Some updates to the original federal funding freeze, where follow-up motion to enforce around some FEMA funds that have been frozen. Ongoing work to challenge tariffs and challenged AmeriCorps grant terminations. And then just again, it's very overwhelming. There's lots of litigation happening around the feds right now, but there are these 2 links. We'll send those out with the slides, both Just Security and Lawfare, where you can look at the status of any of the litigation against the Trump administration. The next slide is around federal funding updates. Likely heard in the news that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was passed and signed into law, and wanted to give you some high-level updates of the impacts that we are expecting to see in Colorado. SNAP or food stamp cuts. There will be a new state cost share, which is going to impact state revenue, and reduced administrative cost reimbursement. Medicaid cuts, there'll be a reduced hospital provider fee, new work requirements. So again, both an impact to the state budget as well as impact to our local governments who are doing eligibility determination. Then it extends the 2017 tax cuts and adds some new business and individual deductions that is also going to have an impact reducing state revenue. And then there's a rapid phase out of renewable energy project tax incentives and rescinding of some unobligated funds from Department of Transportation, Energy, and Environmental Protection Agency from the Inflation Reduction Act. Additionally, we are starting to see congressional appropriations committees meeting. Just so folks remember, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act of Reconciliation could only really address mandatory spending, and then discretionary spending happens in appropriations committees. Expecting the final approval of congressional and Senate appropriations needs to occur before the end of September 30th to avoid a government shutdown and to have new appropriations. And go to the next slide. So some happier news. There are some federal funding updates. Energy tax credits are still in place, but with some changes from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Effective January 2026, there will be some modified eligibility timeline and project qualification criteria. So there are some solar and wind projects that are still eligible. Those projects have to be in service by January 1st of 26, or they have to have started construction by January 1st, 26, and plan to be in service by January of 28. There are commercial and personal EV tax credits available until September of this year, the end of September this year, and geothermal tax credits remain available And please, Dallas Blaney is on this call, but please reach out to Dallas for more information on the energy tax credits. Happy to engage with anyone on their questions. Next slide. And some other federal funding announcements. USDA revolving fund program. This is available to help expand or improve water, wastewater systems. It's open to nonprofit entities, and applications are due in a few weeks in August. There's some water technical assistance through the EPA. And these are all hyperlinks. So when you get the slides, you'll have links to all of those. And when I am done speaking, I will add some of these to the chat as well. Emergency drought relief for tribes due in October, and some emerging contaminants and smaller disadvantaged community grant programs that provides funding to state or territories to serve those communities. Also wanted to share that LOMA and grant writing is still available, so please reach out to our team. Those funds still are dedicated to support new applications for IIJA or IRA funded programs. And that's all I have. I will add some links in the chat, but please reach out to us if you have other questions. Thank you so much.
Kara, thank you for all your work on this and for that very valuable update. Okay, we're going to move now into our formal webinar on budgeting for resiliency. And we're going to begin with our own Shale Sabo, who is the manager of the resiliency program in the Colorado Resiliency Office. Shale, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. And thank you for the opportunity to just kind of help set the context for this conversation, in that preparing for financial uncertainty is really like preparing for any other types of uncertainty or disaster management. And a lot of the same principles apply. So if you want to go to the next slide, Veronica, please. All right, so we often think of disruptions in the form of a more kind of traditional quote unquote disaster, such as those more like acute events that tend to happen like floods and fires. However, disruptions can, as we understand, be systemic or even chronic in nature as well. So to be resilient is to have the ability to also be able to anticipate and adapt to change, such as that we're experiencing at this current moment. Disruptions can also be cyclical in nature, right? We previously experienced a time of kind of a disruption of opposite proportions from where we are at today, with the passing of the historic legislation at the time, like the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, where there was this kind of significant infusion of funds at the state and local levels. But the challenge with that at the time was the rapid rollout, and that required local governments in the state to kind of have to rapidly develop new support systems that hadn't really previously been in place or previously existed, such as the Office of Financial Support that the governor's office now has, and strategic initiatives. And so we had to do that in order to take advantage of the funds, right? But this event also came on the heels of a very acute event like the COVID-19 pandemic, where there was significant concerns at the time around the economy as well as the sustainability of local communities' budgets. So we've kind of come back in a cycle, sort of an event where there was the concerns around uncertainty, there was this kind of new disruption that had this infusion of funds, and now we're kind of back in the state of uncertainty. So while it does feel like an unprecedented moment in history, this is a very kind of similar common cycle that we tend to see in disaster management in general. So we just find ourselves again in a situation where we must be able to plan for the impacts of financial uncertainty across our communities. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to, if folks are familiar who have gone through our Camp Resilience program, just wanted to kind of help us to think about some characteristics that a resilient organization would embody. And so a lot of you at the local level are already applying a lot of these types of characteristics. But when we say resilient, we're thinking about what we're doing today to be able to address the challenges and concerns of not only today, but what could happen into the future, right? So we are applying principles of thinking long-term, or we're applying principles of developing processes where we can be flexible and adaptable to changes that we might not see coming down the line. It's not realistic necessarily to think that we can actually prepare for everything, right? We don't always have the ability to predict exactly what's coming into the future. But if we allow ourselves to develop processes that are more flexible, we can navigate those with ease when they do come. And we'll get into that a little bit more deeply. Also, when we are being held kind of accountable by the communities that we serve, or leadership to some degree, or other types of entities where we feel like we have kind of this reporting structure or this accountability structure, sometimes it can make it feel like we don't have as much flexibility, especially as government entities, to test things out or to try things in a new way. However, also building in that space to be able to try things as we go and see what works and apply lessons learned is also a really important space for us to be in so that we can actually adapt as we go. I just wanted to provide a few of these characteristics that you see up here on the screen to think about what it means when we're a resilient organization. Next slide, please. So when we think about applying these principles to financial uncertainty, navigating change is not new to local governments, especially here in Colorado. We tend to face it every day, whether it's economic transitions or a new policy implementation or navigating through some sort of natural disaster or changes in administration, whether it's at the federal level or local level. Those all come with change. I also wanted to point out, we shared the link in the chat earlier of our resiliency planning survey that we just recently did, which is focused on kind of seeing opportunities for the new framework update. But also what was really a cool takeaway from 2019 when we did that survey in the first place to now is that we've also seen a significant shift in communities across Colorado prioritizing resilient thinking and planning. There was only a small percentage of folks that are not even having the conversation, somewhere less than 10%. And so we are recognizing that as a state and as communities within the state that we all understand the value of doing this type of planning and doing this type of thinking. And so we can apply lessons learned from previous impacts to a situation such as planning for uncertainty. So thinking about things like we've learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, or what we learned when there was this infusion of funding and how we had to shift our systems around. And so just as we would do that post wildfire or post flood, we can do that in this type of context as well. Next slide, please. So before I jump into a couple of the more specific disaster principles, I wanted to just quickly mention that we do have a suite of tools available on our website to help you all in your planning processes. Again, while these have kind of more of like that natural disaster focus to some degree, all of these resources can be used in the same way to apply to financial resiliency as well. So we have our Resilient Resources Hub, which is a curated list of resources that spans kind of the breadth of the disaster management cycle. It spans the breadth of different types of community sectors or different types of goals that you might have, whether that's climate resiliency, financial resiliency, economic transition support. There's a whole suite of tools and resources available on our website. We also have a couple of toolkits. So we have our pre-disaster recovery toolkit, which helps us think about what we can do ahead of time to prepare for an easeful recovery following an event, or to be able to bounce back even better or more quickly. We also have a suite of recovery resources specifically, including who to contact in a recovery situation. And then, as Marguerite mentioned, we have peer exchanges that we do periodically. While the one that we're hosting right now is really around the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board implementation, this is something that can be requested if there is a group of local governments that are really seeking support around a particular area. So if we want to continue this conversation, hosting a peer exchange is something that we can do. And then also, if you're a LinkedIn user, we also have a virtual community of practice around resiliency. So you can work with practitioners from across the state to also have these conversations or to leverage resources or to navigate through challenges you might be experiencing at the local level. Next slide, please. All right, so applying disaster management principles to budgeting for uncertainty. So it's important to first and foremost kind of assess your risk, right? We want to understand how we might be vulnerable to uncertainty. So similar to the way you would for a wildfire situation where you're trying to understand what community members might be at risk or what areas of your community are most vulnerable based on where they exist in the wildland urban interface or the type of topography that's in your community. You also want to understand the vulnerability of operations and programs to funding disruptions, such as, for example, what is your ratio of programs that might be grant dependent versus being able to be funded through the general fund? And part of this is also monitoring trends and forecasts for economic transitions, right, or economic changes. And so showing up on calls like this one, where you're able to get updates from people like Tara, who can help keep you abreast of what's changing, I think is really important as well. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. Next slide. All right, and then I mentioned this a little bit earlier, as far as building flexible systems. Again, it feels uncomfortable to operate in a space where there might be a little bit of an element of the unknown. But it's true that we also can't possibly prepare or anticipate for everything the future holds. As much as it'd be nice to have kind of that crystal ball that's going to tell us what's going to happen next year with the budget, that just doesn't exist. And so what we can do in the meantime is develop processes that allow us to pivot and adapt as needed. So what this looks like is perhaps not committing to an overly rigid budget plan or having waivers or policies in place that allow a local government to have the ability to reallocate discretionary funds in the event of an emergency. So really thinking through, where do we need to be flexible? Where do we need to be able to pivot quickly? And where do we have systems in place that allow us to move those funds in a more flexible way should we experience a significant disruption or impacts to our revenue? Next slide, please. And then this is kind of a disaster management cliche, but preparing for the rainy day. Just as we tend to be advised for kind of our personal finances, it's also important to budget an emergency savings allocation for the unexpected rainy day. So this is really about having a reserve fund that allows for funds to be tapped as needed without having major impacts to ongoing operations, services, and programs. And next slide, please. And then, of course, I want to talk a bit about how we can better institutionalize resiliency or have that as a root culture to build capacity. So again, we often kind of underestimate the internal capital that we already have in the form of skill sets and people within our organizations. And oftentimes we hear it all the time where we talk about ourselves as government entities being kind of broken into silos and not necessarily working across divisions or units in the ways that are more effective and can actually kind of make better use of the resources that are available to us today. So collaboration across teams can be helpful in bolstering capacity by leveraging support and resources across departments towards a common goal. And it can also look like establishing a resiliency officer if possible, or if you have internal resiliency champions that you can continue to uplift or provide additional skills to help with coordination across departments. So do you have somebody designated within the department that can help keep that mindset or that eye on what could be coming down the line in the future, or ways that they can help to develop that coordination across the entire department? And then also they can be a support for integrating resilient budget practices more holistically versus just kind of within one area. And then lastly, establishing clear policies related to budget and funding and effectively articulating how and when funds can be used or even redirected during an emergency or disruption. All right, next slide, please. And with that, I think that is everything that I have for you all today. I will make sure that the links that I mentioned are available to you all, and we can turn it back over to Eric.
Great. Jael, thank you so much. We're going to move now to our Budgeting 101 and Fiscal First Aid portion of the show. We're going to be hearing from Mia Gonzalez. Mia is the Budget Program Administrator with DLG's Local Government Services section. She'll be providing some insights on budgeting basics and resources available during less normal times. Mia, take it away.
Great, thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. As Eric already mentioned, I'm the budget program administrator, and my primary role is to provide guidance on navigating the local government budget law for local governments and review statutorily required documents. So today I'm going to be providing a sort of condensed version of our Budget 101 and share some procedures and practices in the context of the budget law that may be able to help in uncertain times. And I'll also share some resources and services that I think may be helpful to know as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into some crucial deadlines. There are about a little over 4,800 local governments in the state, offering a wide range of services of more than 60 different types. And about 95% of these local governments are subject to the budget law and will need to meet these statutory deadlines. The first is by October 15th, your board will need to be presented with a proposed budget, and then a budget notice for a hearing needs to be posted or published. If your local government has a mill levy, by December 15th, the budget and appropriations must be adopted before the mill levy needs to be certified to the county by this date. And if your local government doesn't have a mill levy, then you have until the end of the calendar year to go ahead and adopt the budget and appropriations. Finally, January 31st, you'll need to e-file your budget packet with us. So this would include all the materials that you've created and gathered during the formal adoption process of your budget. So resolutions adopting the budget, resolutions to appropriate funds or spending agencies, and also, if applicable, the mill levy. And it also needs to include 3 years of comparable revenues and expenditures. Next slide. So as we know and why we're here, the budget will change. And the budget law identifies 3 specific situations where a budget would need to be formally amended by resolution or ordinance and possibly a budget hearing. All of these amendments are rooted in the need to increase appropriations. For those new to local government budgeting or accounting, appropriations are the amounts that your governing board has authorized to be spent for the budget year at the fund or spending agency level. The first type of amendment is called a supplemental amendment. So if you receive unanticipated revenue, for instance, an unexpected grant comes through and you want to spend it within that current budget year, you'll need to formally adopt an amendment to increase your government's spending authority, your appropriation, because you have more money coming in that you want to spend. And then the second type of amendment is a transfer amendment. So some local governments will have only one fund account, their general fund, but other local governments may have more than their general fund. They might have a capital fund, grant-specific funds, a conservation trust fund. And when you need to move money from one fund account to another fund account, then you need to pass a formal amendment, because the fund that is receiving that money, its appropriation needs to be increased. You need to authorize that fund account to be able to spend more. These two amendments, the supplemental amendment and a transfer amendment, is when you're moving money does require a budget notice and a budget hearing. The third type of amendment, a contingency amendment, does not require a hearing, but it does need to be adopted at a public meeting. Contingency amendments are for those unexpected emergencies where your board needs to authorize spending beyond what was originally appropriated. The law doesn't actually define emergencies here, so it's a really good idea to work with your board and maybe even an attorney to figure out what that term means for your specific entity and the services that you're providing, especially when drafting that resolution so you can accurately outline what is considered an emergency for your entity. Because what's an emergency for a cemetery district may not be an emergency for a fire protection district. And now some local governments will actually include a contingency amount or percentage in their initial appropriations to cover unforeseen expenses. For example, if general fund expenses are anticipated to be $100,000, an additional $10,000 might be appropriated as sort of a buffer, totaling the appropriation amount to $110,000. This may be helpful for local governments, to sort of prevent a lot of amendments throughout the year, but the specific amount or rate or however your board appropriates is really a local decision. And that's going to be based on the board and administration's perception of risk. But ideally, it's outlined in a financial policy. Next slide. And here, I just wanted to highlight some of the great resources that are available from the Government Finance Officers Association. They provide a wealth of best practices that can be really valuable to your operations and help weather those uncertain times. These resources that we have here cover critical topics. They're just a few of what GFOA offers. Fund balance guidelines for the general fund, establishing an effective grants policy, internal control for grants. But I also wanted to put on here their fiscal first aid program. I recommend exploring this 12-step process. It's really designed to assist local governments in navigating financial challenges. The program offers practical resources for both immediate and long-term budgeting actions during financially distressing periods. And a lot of the resources that they provide, these best practices in local government budgeting, are really mostly for free. And they also offer a wide range of webinars as well. Next slide. And finally, I want to wrap up with emergency finance reviews. In the event of some local emergencies, the Division of Local Government may be asked to review the financial condition of a local government that's impacted by an emergency, natural disaster, or other major disruption. These include a process where we are requested specifically by the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management or the Governor's Office to do this emergency finance review to evaluate the financial capacity of a local government to handle unplanned expenditures or revenue disruption. So for example, the division will evaluate if a local government might have difficulty meeting the local match requirements for federal funds used for response and recovery efforts. Some historic examples include the 2013 wildfires and floods, the Marshall Fire, but also other more localized emergencies. So we're here through my unit, the Local Government Services team, and our field staff and the Resiliency Office to provide technical assistance to local governments on reserve policies, long-term financial planning, to help manage these risks to fiscal health that's caused by shocks and stressors. So I hope you find these resources and information valuable. I'm always available to help answer questions about navigating the budget law and getting your materials to us as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Eric.
Great. Thank you so much, Mia. That's fantastic information. And just so everyone knows, we might run over a little bit. It's about 11:50 now. We still have one more presentation to go. We will be sticking around after to answer questions, so don't feel like we're going to be cutting it off right at noon there. We will be able to stick around if you have additional questions. So we're going to hear from our own Dana Levac. Dana is the regional manager for the Northwest region of the state. He's going to provide some insights on budgeting around years such as this one, when there is less capital funding available. Dana, take it away.
Thank you, Eric. It's so good to know I have more than 10 minutes to cover how to do a budget. The one thing we talk about is the uncertainties. I just want to quickly just address them just to make sure everybody's thinking of what the uncertainties are. We talk about formulaic versus competitive grants, and we tend to think that the formula grants are fairly certain. And I would just suggest to you that while the formulas are generally certain, you should be looking at the legislative source of the funding, because sometimes that funding is subject to reapportionment by the legislative or higher governing body. We saw that this year with severance funds, where the legislature reapportioned that money. So even though the formula has stayed in place, there's no money to apply the formula to. Also, in a tighter environment, the normal competitiveness of grants becomes even more competitive because people are constrained and limited to the funding sources they can go. So we end up seeing more projects and more needs. So the competitiveness of those grants actually becomes higher as well. When we think about the political factors, I don't need to go into it too much. You've got the issues of tariff rates, immigration, employment, can all have significant impacts on what your current and future capital projects are going to cost, as well as what that revenue might be that you might or might not see. The structural uncertainty involves things that you can have a little more control over. When you're looking at payroll costs, projecting those out over what the consumer index has shown in terms of inflationary factors, you should be looking at not just looking at next year's payroll, but what's the impact on your payroll moving forward over the years to make sure that you're planning accordingly. The thing I really want to focus on are the things that you can control a little more. And I refer to them as micro-political uncertainty, which is really localized factors. And the other thing is the elected and appointeds, as well as your community perspectives on what's going on. The way that I recommend you're dealing with those is through a strong strategic planning process that then gets tied back into your capital planning and your capital budgeting. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Next slide, please. GFOA has guidance, and their guidance is 2 months of operating expenses. I would strongly recommend that is not enough in normal times, much less in current times. I think pushing those reserves to at least 6 months of operating expenses is a much stronger practice to ensure that you can survive downturns in tourism or sales tax. Your enterprise funds should not be as subject to those kind of downturns, but I would strongly recommend you continue to keep those at least a 6-month assigned reserve. The strongest enterprise funds that I've encountered over my years not only have operating reserves, but they have capital reserves. Some of those budgets that I've seen put those capital reserves or take those capital reserves from the standard revenue sources, but others actually have an additional fee, which you have to implement through your local process, whatever that may be. And as an example, I have a town that has an $8.50 additional fee on every bill, which is restricted into a capital construction account. And through that, they're able to build their reserves to be able to predict revenue moving into the future to enable that they are sufficient to at least fund planned capital needs such as distribution line replacements, filter changes, SCADA upgrades, or skid replacements. Pure capital funds are a little bit harder to address, only because some jurisdictions have mill levies that are funding capital needs. Some have a portion of sales tax that are addressing capital needs. But regardless of what the revenue stream is, engaging in strong long-term capital planning and budgeting is critical, particularly in uncertain times. Next slide, please. I referred to strategic planning before, and having a well-defined, updated strategic plan is critical to dealing with uncertainty. As a general rule, you should have no less than a 5-year plan, preferably at least a 10-year plan, and optimally a 20-year strategic plan that should be and each of these should be reviewed annually, updated at least every 5 years, and redone completely within at least 2 years of its expiration as necessary. I talked about elected leadership and community uncertainty as risks in the planning and budgeting process. A strong process of engagement during the development of a strategic plan is crucial to minimizing these risks. If it's simply the elected governing body sitting back and saying, this is what we want to do over the next year or 2 years or 3 years, you're not involving the community, you're not involving future leaders, you're not involving a sufficient base of staff to ensure that that plan is understood and followed well moving into the future. If you have a strategic plan, tying your annual budgeting process back to that strategic plan is critical. Any capital activities should relate back to the goals and objectives set forth in your strategic plan.
Dana, we can't hear you. It looks like you're not muted, but I can't hear you now. Your audio went out.
How's that?
That's better. You're back.
Okay, I'm not sure where I cut out. What was the last thing I was just addressing?
Just about 30 seconds ago. It was very, very recent.
Okay, so talking about the necessity for strategic plans to be tied into your capital budgeting process. Literally every goal within your strategic plan should have some sort of an identifier, whether it's a Roman numeral, letter, whatever. And you can tie every capital budget item back to one of those goals. If you do that during your budget process, you will keep those goals and priorities active in both your community's mind and your elected leader and staff's mind. Now, one of the inherent problems with not having a strategic plan that you tie your capital spending back to is you lose the community's interest, you lose the investment, and you lose the focus of elected leaders. This is a very common problem in most of the smaller communities. And I'll move to the next slide, please. A lot of smaller communities have, next slide, have a 1-year plan. And that's it. They're looking at what we do this year and what are we going to do next year. It's virtually impossible to predict forward as well as to build adequate reserves if you're only looking one year in advance. Next slide, please. A 5-year outlook is a whole lot better, but it's only to the extent it's specific enough to show future spending plans that are tied to the strategic plan, whether that's vehicle replacement, capital maintenance, whatever it is. You have to be sufficient enough that you can tie it back to the capital plan. When you move to an even longer plan, next slide, please. You can see how this particular jurisdiction, and my apologies if any of the jurisdictions that I've kind of utilized, these are out of actual filed budgets. But you can see they go out year after year predicting next year and the year after we are going to spend this or need to spend this kind of money. Now, one of the benefits of doing this is you can go back to your strategic plan and identify wants versus needs. Next slide, please. When you identify wants versus needs, you can better adjust your budget as the uncertainties start to hit you, money gets tighter, and you need to start considering, well, are we going to do this capital project or not do this capital project? If during your budget process you have identified a need versus a want, it's easier to go back and start to pull money from the wants and leave money for the needs in place. An example, and please forgive me, these are just off the top of my head. You can agree or disagree with whether these things are needs or wants, but generally a need is a contractual obligation. You are obligated to pay a capital lease or you have a construction contract. Those are needs. An item that is required to comply with a regulatory mandate is generally a need. An item that is required under advice of counsel is generally a need. An item that will result in a cost savings based on an analytical return on investment computation is still probably a need, because better to spend the money to save the money. But you can even prioritize within those need categories, which are your highest priorities. A want, on the other hand, is an item that is going to enhance the quality of life. We all want better quality of life, but generally speaking, your population is surviving in the quality of life they have. An item that enhances economic growth. It's definitely a want. We all want to have better economies. But if it's a matter of survival and doing the things you need to do versus you want to do, it becomes a want. Providing better working conditions, providing better service to citizens are all wonderful wants, and they're great goals. But in the times when you must prioritize and figure out where money's coming from, being able to identify them and shift will make it a whole lot easier to adjust to the uncertainty that we're currently facing within all of our jurisdictions. So that's pretty general. I'm happy to answer any questions that somebody may have that is a little more specific. I strongly recommend you reach out to your regional managers. Every regional manager is familiar with these budget process and issues. Even though we each have kind of our subject matter of expertise, we're all available to each other and are there to support every jurisdiction. So if there are any questions, otherwise I'll turn it back to Eric. I'm sorry, that was so very, very fast.
That was perfect. Are there questions of Mr. Lovac, Counselor at Large on the Western Slope? Okay, well, listen, thank you so much, Dana. Let's see if there's, okay. If you, again, you can put them into the Q&A function, you can put them into the chat, or you can, and we will be happy to try and answer them. And I will tell you right now, I don't want this call to ever end, but I know we all need to eventually eat lunch today. And so with that, we want to share a few more resources with you. The local community funding guide, the community-driven engagement guide for community planning, and also a reminder this call is as an ongoing bi-monthly basis. We also are going to share some information on how to get a hold of your regional managers and your housing development specialists for additional support. I do want to thank all of our speakers for joining us today. We've had a lot of information coming at you. We do want to open it up now and try to answer maybe some of the outstanding questions that were not answered in the chat. And I will turn it over to maybe Veronica can help us sort some of those out, or Shale, and make sure we get these addressed right now. So are there questions that were not answered, guys, that we need to bring up and try to answer verbally?
I am not seeing any outstanding questions, just around materials after this call, which we will absolutely send notes, slides, and a recording of this call, especially for some of you that had to leave right on time. Let's hang out for just one more minute just to see if any else come up.
Very good. In the meantime, I will remind everybody that there will be a follow-up email coming to all of you with with the meeting recording link, materials, the slideshows, the notes, the Q&A, And I will tell you, our next call will be on September 17th. And will be some reminder emails going out about that as well. All right.
Okay, seeing none, I just want to thank Eric and all the speakers for all the amazing information. We look forward to seeing you in September.
Everyone take care. Have a good week. Cheers.
All right. Kirsten, thank you so much. I think I'm gonna shut it down. So the Zoom will record the transcript, the chats. So I will share with you what the draft ends up looking like before we put it into Gov Delivery and send it on to all the participants.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll take a look at the draft and I'll review my notes too to see kind of like what I felt like was most important. And I think there were a couple links shared too where I wanted to just like quadruple check that they made it in there.
That sounds, yep, I appreciate it. I appreciate your help.
Anytime.
Eric, anything?
No,
On your
thank you so
end?
much. Thank you everybody for all your help, and the preparation was as usual, just absolutely fantastic. So thank you guys all for all the time you put into this, and I will see you again.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.
Have a lovely day.
Mhm.